100 years ago, in the bright halls of the Galactic Council, the sentence was passed, a sentence that would echo through time like a blade scraping on steel. Humanity was declared a threat to peace, a danger to stability, and without mercy, they were stripped of their colonies, their fleets dismantled, their banners torn down, their name erased from star maps as if they had never existed. The Council called it justice, but humanity remembered it as exile. Hundreds of ships filled with billions of humans were forced beyond the known edge of space, into the cold and silent void that no empire dared to enter, a place of black stars and frozen darkness, a place where no one was supposed to survive. The Council believed they had ended the story of Earth. No one argued. No one wept for them. To the galaxy, humanity became nothing more than a line in a forgotten history file. But the void was not death. The void was silence, and silence can build monsters. In the years that followed, the galaxy grew loud again. Fleets moved through trade lanes, colonies expanded, empires fought over borders, and no one ever looked into the darkness where they had thrown the humans. Why would they? No one returns from the void. That was what they told themselves. But beyond the last jump gates, deep in the cold where the stars burned like dying embers, humanity learned to live. They learned to grow in the dark. They learned to build an empire the galaxy could not see. On the 100th anniversary of their exile, the galaxy changed forever. It started as nothing, a faint pulse on long-range scanners, something so small that technicians thought it was background noise. But the pulse grew louder, clearer, carrying with it a signal that had not been heard in a century. It came not from any known system, but from the deep void itself. And then 3 words spread across every channel, cutting through defenses, through encryption, through every wall the empires had built. We remember everything. Those 3 words turned 1,000 war rooms silent. Admirals who had never feared anything found their hands trembling. Entire governments froze, trying to find the source of a signal that shouldn't even exist. Because the humans were supposed to be gone. Dead. Ash in the dark. But the voice was human. Calm. Steady. Certain. The same voice they had once ignored when they cast Earth out. Inside the council chamber, the high speaker's eyes went wide as the message replayed again and again. No static, no distortion. Just 3 words that felt like a knife pressing against the heart of the galaxy. We remember everything. The room filled with shouting, senators and generals yelling over each other, demanding answers, demanding reassurance, demanding someone to say it wasn't real. But the signal was real. Every empire had received it. At the exact same moment, on the exact same frequency, bypassing every firewall, every block, as if humanity knew how to crawl through their defenses. Panic came not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't said. Humans were not begging to return. They were not asking for mercy. They were remembering. And that meant they hadn't died. In the outer rim, listening stations lit up with strange readings. Whole sectors felt the weight of something vast moving in the void, beyond the reach of the council fleets. Patrols sent to investigate never came back. No debris. No distress calls. Just silence. The same silence humanity had been forced to live with. Some called it an accident, some called it ghosts, but the oldest admirals, the ones who had seen the exile, whispered the truth. They said the wolves had survived. When Earth was cast into the void, they hadn't vanished. They had gone silent, waiting. For 100 years, they had watched the galaxy fatten itself on arrogance, grow soft and lazy, while they sharpened their claws in the dark. In a mining colony at the edge of council space, a worker looked up and saw a shadow moving between the stars, larger than anything he had ever seen. No lights, no markings, just a dark shape sliding through the void like it owned the night. And then the power on the colony died, every screen went black, and the shadow vanished. His report never reached the capital. On border stations, experienced commanders began to notice the pattern. Satellites failing in perfect silence. Communication relays flickering off. Entire trading lanes going quiet. And all of it pointing to one direction, the void. It's them, one old officer said, his voice cracking. They've come back. Inside the council war chamber, the high speaker slammed his claw on the table, demanding answers. His generals gave him empty words about tricks, pirates, false signals. But everyone saw the fear behind their eyes. They remembered how humanity had once fought. Not like diplomats. Not like politicians. Like predators. Unforgiving. Silent. When the council cast them into the void, they thought they had sent them to die. But all they had done was give them a hunting ground with no witnesses. On that day, every major empire began locking down its borders, fleets moved to defensive positions, and whispers spread like fire through the streets of 1,000 worlds. The humans are back. The humans are coming. Deep in the darkness, a fleet waited. Massive ships built from the bones of forgotten colonies, shaped with technology no one in the galaxy had ever seen, silent, black, deadly. Their commanders stood beneath the symbol of a wolf carved into steel, the same symbol that once made entire fleets break. They had waited a century for this. Not for revenge. For justice. And now, the galaxy would remember them again, not as weak, not as broken, but as a nightmare that had learned to wear silence like armor. The signal repeated one last time before vanishing completely. 3 words. We remember everything. The council had thrown them into the void, but the void had given them something far greater than death. It had given them time to become the galaxy's greatest fear across the galaxy. The message spread like wildfire in the dark, not carried by ships or fleets but by fear itself. 3 words whispered through every channel. We remember everything. 3 words that no one could block, no one could trace, no one could silence. Entire empires froze in place as that single voice echoed through their comms, their stations, their ships, every world hearing it at the same second, and every world feeling the same chill crawl through their bones. The council tried to control the panic, but the truth was already loose. What was meant to be forgotten had returned, and the ghosts they threw into the void were not ghosts anymore, they were awake. On border stations closest to the Exile zone, sensors began to flicker like weak candles in a storm. Patrol fleets moved to investigate, confident that the humans couldn't have survived 100 years in the black. But they didn't come back. Their last transmissions were fragments, static, short breaths and then silence, no gunfire, no screams, just the sound of comms cutting out mid-word. As if something swallowed them whole. The council received the reports but dismissed them at first, calling it technical failure, but the failures kept happening, one by one, station by station, relay by relay, until entire sectors of the outer rim went dark. Merchant convoys fled toward the inner worlds, whispering of black shapes drifting in the night, massive ships with no lights, no flags, no signatures, only a single glowing wolf symbol that burned against the stars, like a mark left by a predator on its prey. Governments told them they were seeing things, illusions, but the number of missing ships kept growing, and the silence at the edge of the galaxy became impossible to ignore. Inside the council chamber, chaos erupted as the high speaker pounded the table, demanding someone explain how a dead species could send a message across the galaxy, demanding why fleets were disappearing without leaving debris, without even a fight. Admirals threw sensor reports at the table, red zones spreading like infection across the star map, and someone finally whispered what everyone else was too afraid to say, "It's them." That single whisper shut the room down like a knife through a throat. No one laughed this time, no one dismissed it, because the oldest among them still remembered the war. They remembered the black fleets, the way Terran ships used to move like wolves hunting in the dark, silent, relentless, precise. Back then it had taken every empire to push humanity into the void, and even then it had cost them blood. Now they were back, and no one knew how strong they had become. In the great capital city, civilians gathered around public holoscreens as emergency broadcasts interrupted daily life. The message was simple: remain calm, the council has the situation under control. But the faces of the speakers were pale, their voices too tight. The people could feel it. The lie tasted like iron in the air. Because everyone had heard the signal too, everyone had felt the weight in those words. They weren't threats. They were promises. Trade routes collapsed as merchants refused to travel. Colonies sealed themselves. Entire economies trembled before the Terrans had even fired a single shot. And that was the most terrifying part. They hadn't attacked anyone yet, but the galaxy was already breaking under the pressure of their silence. Deep inside the command bunker, the council military staff tried to send fleets to the borders, but their communications jammed, not because of hacking, not because of an attack, but because their own infrastructure had been quietly taken over. The humans were using the skeleton of the same network the Council had built over Terran technology. They had always known how to get inside. "They're already here," one technician whispered, hands shaking as entire fleet communication hubs blinked out at once. Out near the old Exile zone, a small observation satellite caught the first real image. A wall of black ships sliding through the void like a tide, no engine flares, no weapons visible, moving with perfect precision. And when the image reached the Council chamber, the room went silent, every delegate staring at the massive fleet that should not have existed. A fleet no one could have built in exile, not out there in the cold, but humanity had. The High Speaker's throat went dry as he whispered, "How long have they been preparing for this?" And the answer came not in words but in the rising wave of silence consuming system after system. Meanwhile, across the stars, alien citizens whispered in fear, stories spreading faster than any military order could. Stories of a fleet that didn't talk, didn't negotiate, didn't threaten. It simply waited in the dark. A fleet that remembered everything the galaxy had done to their home. The panic became bigger than any attack could have caused. Fleets began to retreat before the humans even arrived. Border planets declared emergencies without seeing a single Terran soldier. The galaxy wasn't fighting humans yet. It was fighting its own fear. Inside the void, in the command deck of the Terran flagship, there was no shouting, no panic, no rage. A single commander stood before a massive star map glowing red with Council systems. Their eyes were calm, their voice steady. Phase 1 is complete. The lights of the fleet flickered like wolves blinking in the dark. Humanity wasn't rushing. Humanity was hunting. And the hunt had just begun. The first Terran fleet appeared like a shadow falling across the stars, not with fanfare, not with roaring engines or blazing weapons, but with a silence so heavy it felt like the void itself had opened its eyes. Scanners on the outer rim stations flickered with static. Alarms flashed red, operators screamed across channels, trying to make sense of the impossible readings, and then everything went black. Their sensors couldn't see the ships, their targeting systems couldn't lock on. It was as if the fleet wasn't even there. But the darkness was moving, spreading, swallowing everything in its path. The Council had believed humanity would die in the void, but the humans had turned the void into a weapon. The fleet was massive, built in the shadows where no law existed, black dreadnoughts stretching like jagged teeth against the faint light of distant stars. Smaller hunter ships sliding in and out of formation like wolves circling prey, their hulls absorbing all signals, their engines whispering through space, and at the front of it all, a single colossal flagship, its wolf emblem glowing dim and steady like a heart that had never stopped beating. Patrol fleets from 3 different empires rushed to intercept, confident that the humans were just raiders or pirates. They had no idea what was waiting for them. The moment they entered the dark sector, their ships began to vanish one by one. No explosions, no distress signals, no warning, just blips on a screen winking out like dying stars. Crews shouted over comms, sensors went dead, and before anyone realized what was happening, the fleets were gone. Inside the Council chamber, red lights flashed across the star map. The High Speaker slammed his claw against the table as reports poured in. Patrol fleets erased in minutes, no trace left behind. The admirals argued in disbelief. Some said it was sabotage, some said it was an illusion. But the oldest generals, the ones who remembered the last war, stared at the map in silence, their eyes wide, because they recognized the pattern. The exact hunting formation the Terran fleet had once used a century ago, precision born from patience, a kill without sound. Out on the border, one surviving frigate tried to send a transmission, its captain shaking, voice cracked with fear, "They're here." And then his screen filled with the shadow of a dreadnought bigger than anything he had ever seen. The transmission cut, leaving nothing but static, and another light went out on the star map. On the Terran flagship, rows of operators moved in perfect silence, their hands steady, their breathing calm, no cheering, no shouting, no war cry, only the soft hum of a war machine that had waited a century to wake up. Humanity had not returned weak. They had returned sharper than the day they were cast out. Entire Council border sectors were already falling, not because of massive battles, but because no one could see the enemy, no one could fight what they couldn't touch. Stations went dark, fleets disappeared, and fear spread faster than any war could. In the inner worlds, civilians whispered of black fleets that moved without sound, of glowing wolf symbols on the night sky, and the whispers grew into panic. Merchant ships refused to travel. ports were abandoned, governments declared martial law before a single Terran shot had been fired. In one desperate move, the Council authorized their rapid response armada to hold the line at the Iris Gate, a strategic choke point that had never fallen in any war. A wall of nearly 2,000 ships stood waiting, admirals shouting orders, promising the galaxy that they would crush whatever came through. But the Terrans didn't come through the gate. They came around it. Every alarm screamed as the Black Fleet slipped past defenses like a shadow flowing through cracks, appearing inside their formation without warning. Thousands of Council ships turned their guns to fire but found nothing to lock on. And then, in perfect silence, the Terran dreadnoughts opened their weapons, clean, surgical, terrifying. Within 10 minutes the entire armada was nothing but debris spinning slowly in the dark. The galaxy's strongest defense line had fallen without a single Terran casualty. In the Council chamber, the High Speaker stared at the star map, his mouth dry, his hands trembling, because entire fleets were gone and the enemy hadn't even spoken once. One senator whispered, "They're not invading," and another answered, "No, they're hunting." The old admirals lowered their heads, remembering the war they had thought was over. Humanity had returned, not as a lost people begging for a place, but as hunters reclaiming what was once stolen. On the flagship, a single commander stood before the glowing map of the galaxy, marking each system falling into silence, and with a calm voice he said, "Phase 2 is complete." No celebration followed. No speeches. Just the quiet hum of engines and the long shadow of the wolf spreading deeper into Council space. The void that once was their prison had become their empire. And now, the hunters were home, inside the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, the same hall where a century ago they had voted to cast humanity into the void. Silence fell heavier than it ever had before. The laughter that once echoed through these walls was gone, replaced by fear creeping through the cracks like smoke. The star map hovered in the center of the room, glowing red like a bleeding wound, entire fleets erased, border sectors gone dark, trade lanes severed without warning. No one wanted to speak the truth out loud, but everyone could feel it pressing down on their chests. The humans weren't coming back, they were already here. The High Speaker gripped the edge of the table with trembling claws, his voice a broken whisper as reports poured in faster than he could read them. Every fleet sent to intercept the Terran armada had been wiped out without leaving wreckage. Every system that lit up with Terran movement was offline within hours. Defense networks built over decades were crumbling in minutes. The old admirals stood at the edges of the room, their faces pale, their mouths shut, because they recognized this silence. They had seen it before. The Council had thrown the wolves into the dark, and the wolves had learned how to hunt in ways no one could stop. Around the chamber, senators screamed at each other, one demanding war, another demanding surrender, others shouting for negotiations. But all of their words meant nothing, because the Terrans hadn't said a single word since their return. They had spoken once through the signal, and after that, the galaxy had started falling apart without a second warning. On the outer colonies, chaos spread faster than any fleet could move. Civilians abandoned their cities. Ships clogged jump gates trying to flee toward the core. Planetary governors sent distress calls that never reached their destinations because the humans had taken the communication grid apart like threads unraveling from an old cloak. No one knew how they had infiltrated the network, but it was clear now, they had never really left it. The Council had built their entire infrastructure on top of Terran foundations, and now those foundations belonged to the wolves again. The High Speaker slammed his fist on the table, screaming for calm, demanding someone take control. But every admiral avoided his eyes because they had nothing left to give. They had thrown humanity into the void thinking it would end them, but instead, they had given them the one thing no empire could buy: time. Across Council space, Terran dreadnoughts moved like silent blades through the dark, cutting through fleets that never even saw them coming. Outposts simply vanished without a sound. The few survivors who managed to send messages spoke of black ships gliding like shadows, of entire task forces being wiped out before the first alarm finished ringing. One terrified captain whispered, "They're not fighting us. They're erasing us." That single recording spread like poison through the ranks, and morale collapsed faster than any defense line could be drawn. In the chamber, one young senator shouted that they should open a communication channel to Earth, offer surrender before the fleet reached the core worlds. But the older admirals just shook their heads, because they understood what the rest refused to see. Earth didn't negotiate after a warning. They didn't ask, they didn't bargain, they acted. Their warning had been the signal. Everything else was consequence. Entire empires that once mocked humanity were now begging for protection. Allies turned on each other, blaming everyone except themselves. But no one could point a weapon at the wolves in the dark because the wolves were everywhere and nowhere. In the central control towers, operators stared helplessly as system after system blinked out. Power grids collapsing like a chain reaction. Entire star sectors falling into Terran silence without a single Terran soldier ever stepping foot on their worlds. Panic took root not through destruction but through the cold understanding that they had already lost before the first major battle even began. Fleet Command tried to regroup what was left of their armadas near the capital systems, forming what they proudly called the Iron Wall, a last line of defense around the Council core. Thousands of ships lined up in perfect formation, shining like a wall of steel and pride, but deep down everyone knew this wasn't strength, it was desperation. On the Terran flagship, hidden in the Black Sea of Void, commanders watched it all unfold on their star map, their movements precise, their strategies already set decades ago. They didn't need to rush, because panic itself was their greatest weapon. One officer calmly reported the fall of another major sector, and the lead commander simply said, as expected. There were no cheers, no shouting, no rage. Humanity didn't come for glory. They came to remind the galaxy what it meant to provoke them. Back in the council chamber, the High Speaker's voice finally cracked as he whispered, "We thought they'd die out there." An older admiral turned to him with empty eyes and replied, "No one kills the wolves in their own forest." At that moment, new red lines appeared on the star map, slicing deep into council territory, bypassing every fleet, surrounding the Iron Wall like water flowing around a stone, quiet and inevitable, the same way predators circle prey before the end. The chamber fell silent. No one had anything left to say. The war had already been decided the moment they cast humanity into the void. And now the void had come back to collect its debt. The storm began without a single warning, no alarms, no distant tremors, no time to prepare. One moment the Council's last great armada hovered above their core worlds, shields bright and engines ready. The next moment the stars went dark as the Terran fleet stepped out of the void like silent executioners. Black dreadnoughts the size of cities slid into formation with a precision no other empire could match. No one saw them arrive. They were simply there, surrounding the Council's most powerful fleet like wolves around dying prey. Their wolf emblems burning white against the black hulls. And for the first time in a century the galaxy truly understood what it meant to be hunted. The admirals on the command bridge screamed for targeting locks, but the targeting systems were already blind, scrambled without a single shot fired. The Terrans hadn't even opened fire yet and half the Council's fleet was in chaos. Their ships colliding, breaking formation, panic spreading like fire. One officer shouted that the enemy was everywhere. Another screamed they couldn't track them. A third whispered what no one wanted to say, "We're surrounded." In orbit, the first dreadnought moved, slow and deliberate, its black surface drinking in every light around it. And with a single burst of energy, the Council's forward line simply ceased to exist. No explosions lighting up the sky, no heroic resistance, just ships breaking apart like paper under a tidal wave, debris scattering silently into the void. The Council's fleet opened fire in every direction, desperate, wild, but their weapons hit nothing but empty darkness. The Terrans moved too fast, too quietly, like ghosts cutting through steel. On the Council capital world, billions of citizens watched the sky as the battle began. Their once bright and proud orbit now flickering with distant lights of their dying armada. And though no one could hear the Terrans, they felt their presence like a blade against their throat. Entire wings of defense cruisers vanished in seconds. One dreadnought alone ripped through an entire battle line of 70 ships. Their shields useless against weapons they didn't even understand. It wasn't a war. It was a demonstration. A message. Humanity hadn't come to bargain. They had come to erase. The High Speaker screamed for reinforcements, for hidden fleets, for something, anything that could stop what was happening. But every system they tried to call was already dark. Every fleet they counted on was already gone. The humans had made sure of it long before this night began. Their networks were their cage now, their weapons useless, their strategies meaningless. How are they doing this? One admiral shouted, but the old war generals already knew. This was Terran warfare. The kind the Council had feared 100 years ago, patient, silent, merciless, built not on brute strength but on absolute precision. The humans weren't fighting their fleet. They were dismantling it like an engineer taking apart a machine. The first wave of Terran hunter ships swept through the flanks, moving like shadows, slicing apart carriers and support ships before anyone could react, leaving the dreadnoughts exposed. Then came the Terran dreadnoughts themselves, slow, unstoppable, carving through the enemy like wolves through snow. Each ship fired once. Only once. And entire clusters of enemy ships disappeared into glowing debris fields. Within 20 minutes, the most powerful fleet the galaxy had ever built was nothing more than burning fragments scattered around the capital world. On the bridge of the lead Terran flagship, there was no shouting, no rage, no pride, only calm silence, every officer focused like a blade, their commander's voice low and cold. Phase 3. Complete. Meanwhile, in the skies of the capital world, the last few surviving Council ships tried to flee, their engines screaming through broken comms. But the Terrans didn't chase them. They didn't need to. A wave of small hunter craft cut them off like wolves driving prey into a corner. One by one the ships fell, not with loud cries but with the quiet collapse of metal under unstoppable force. Down on the surface, the people could do nothing but watch, their faces pale, their hands trembling as the last lights of their defense fleet blinked out. The sky above their world turning black with the shape of Terran ships, thousands of them, not moving, just hovering, like a storm that no longer needed to rage because the prey was already dead. Inside the council chamber, the High Speaker collapsed to his knees, his voice shaking as he whispered, "This was supposed to be impossible." An old admiral answered without looking at him, his voice hollow, "They spent a century making impossible things possible." The chamber fell quiet, the sound of failure louder than any explosion. The Terrans had spoken their warning long ago. This was not war. This was punishment. Above the capital, the Terran fleet didn't raise flags, didn't make demands, didn't send envoys. They simply surrounded the planet in perfect formation. Their silence heavier than any victory speech. Their shadows crawling across the surface like a reminder carved into the sky. The Council had thrown them into the void. Now the void had come home. The galaxy had never been this quiet. Not in centuries, not since before the rise of the Council's iron grip. The great fleets that once filled the void were nothing but drifting debris. The powerful empires that once roared now whispered in fear. The Council's proud core world stared into a black sky filled with Terran warships, and there was no sound, no threat, no demand, just the crushing silence of a predator that no longer needed to hunt, because the prey was already trapped. The Council's military command centers flickered. With emergency lights, their star maps soaked in red, showing entire sectors lost, comm channels burned out, jump gates dead, supply lines cut clean with surgical precision. They had built their empire on arrogance, and that arrogance had left them blind to the wolves growing in the void. On the ground, panic spread like fire beneath the skin of a dying beast. Streets once glowing with life were now shadows. Crowds pressed together beneath the dark sky, eyes fixed upward as massive black dreadnoughts floated like silent mountains. No engines screaming, no weapons flashing, just presence. A presence that spoke louder than any fleet ever could. People whispered to each other in shaking voices, asking the same question over and over, why aren't they doing anything? But the truth was more terrifying than any bombardment. Humanity didn't need to strike anymore. The Council had already destroyed itself the moment it underestimated them. In the control towers, admirals shouted orders into dead comm lines, their voices echoing back with nothing but static. Fleets that had once been their shield were gone. Allies that once pledged loyalty were silent. Every plan they built was crumbling in their hands like sand slipping through broken fingers. One commander stared at the screens and whispered to no one, "We're already finished." The High Speaker walked through the Council's war chamber like a man lost in his own palace, every step echoing against the floor as if mocking him. His empire had burned without a single city bombed, without a single formal declaration of war. The humans had broken everything with patience, not fire. Out in the stars, Terran hunter ships glided between crippled jump lanes, ensuring no fleet, no convoy, no soul escaped the gravity of their return. Systems that once glowed bright with commerce were now cold, their lights gone, their governments collapsed, their leaders either hiding or surrendering. Empires that once mocked Earth had their flags torn down by their own people, because no one wanted to be on the side that had angered the wolves. On one of the Council's largest shipyards, A fleet of battleships sat powerless as the Terran dreadnoughts appeared overhead. No missiles were fired, no battle even started. The crews simply dropped their weapons and opened their comm channels with one message: we surrender. Humanity didn't respond. They didn't need to. They moved past them like shadows and left them kneeling in the dark. Entire sectors followed, bending without resistance, surrendering before a single Terran soldier ever set foot on their soil. Because they all understood the same truth. The humans weren't coming to negotiate or rule, they were delivering judgment. In the city squares of the capital world, massive screens once used to project council propaganda now flickered between static and the image of the Terran wolf emblem, glowing bright and cold against the night sky, and each pulse of that emblem sent another wave of panic through the crowds, because every heartbeat of light reminded them, this was not their galaxy anymore. In the shadows of a broken command center, a group of young officers begged the High Speaker to open a communication channel to Earth, to plead for mercy, but the older admirals shook their heads, their voices steady but empty. Mercy isn't in their silence. The Terrans had given their warning a long time ago. The Council ignored it. This was the cost. High above the capital, the fleet shifted in perfect synchronization, dreadnoughts forming an orbital ring, hunter ships locking into positions like the teeth of a trap closing around its prey. No one dared to shoot. No one dared to speak. Because everyone understood what would happen if a single shot broke this stillness. It wouldn't be a war, it would be annihilation. And still, the humans didn't fire. They let the fear do the work. Empires far away from the core world began transmitting their unconditional surrender. Planetary leaders begging for terms that would never come. Entire fleets sending their transponders offline and waiting in silence for their fate. Inside the council chamber, the High Speaker finally fell into his seat, his hands shaking, his voice cracking as he whispered, "We cast them into the void to die." An old admiral standing beside him replied, "And they built an empire in the dark." The room was quiet, suffocating, and the truth hung over everyone like a weight they couldn't escape. Out in the black, on the Terran flagship, the human commander stood before the star map glowing with the fractured remains of the council. His expression calm, unreadable, his voice steady. Phase 4. Complete. His fleet didn't cheer, didn't celebrate, because this wasn't about glory. This was about memory. About making the galaxy remember what they did and what they created. The humans had returned not as survivors, but as the storm that silence itself feared. The sky above the council's last stronghold was no longer a sky. It was a graveyard of stars swallowed by the black shadows of Terran dreadnoughts. Their vast hulls formed an orbital ring around the capital world so tight that not even light seemed to escape. Their wolf emblems burned like cold white fire, silent, merciless, and patient. Cities below them lay frozen, entire populations standing in the streets. Looking up at the darkness that now owned their sky, the council had built their empire on arrogance. They had ruled through fear, through fleets, through power, but now they understood what true fear felt like. The kind that didn't shout, didn't roar, it just stared down at you, waiting for you to understand you're already finished. Inside the council chamber, the High Speaker stared at the star map, his throat dry, his hands shaking against the glowing table. There were no more fleets left to command, no sectors left to call for help, no allies to beg for aid. The map was nothing but black, black where their fleets used to shine, black where their worlds used to answer, black where their power once lived, and around that black, Terran ships like wolves encircling the last heartbeat of a dying empire. Generals shouted orders out of desperation, ordering defenses that no longer existed, broadcasting commands to fleets that were already dust in the void. No one wanted to be the first to say it, but they all knew, this wasn't a war anymore, this was the end. A sudden crackle echoed through the chamber as the planetary comm systems flickered. Every screen, every speaker, every channel across the planet fell silent. And then, through the dark, through the static, came the voice. A human voice. Calm, steady, heavy with centuries of memory. "You threw us into the void," the voice said, "and now the void answers." The chamber fell silent like a tomb. Every senator, every admiral, every soldier froze as the voice echoed again. This time across the entire planet, reaching every home, every bunker, every trembling soul. This ends today. Outside, the Terran dreadnoughts moved as one, slowly, perfectly, their engines glowing faintly like the breath of a sleeping predator. The planetary shield grid lit up in a final desperate attempt to resist. But within seconds the entire shield cracked like glass under pressure, shattering without a single Terran weapon touching it. Their defenses had never mattered, it was all built on top of a lie. The belief that they would never have to face the wolves again. On the streets, people screamed, some fell to their knees. Others just stood there, silent and pale, because everyone knew what those words meant. This was not a negotiation. This was judgment. In the Council's military command, an officer begged the High Speaker to give the order to surrender. Another screamed that they should fight to the last. But the High Speaker didn't answer. He just stared at the wolf emblem burning in the sky like a god staring down at ants. And in that moment, the proud leader of the galaxy finally understood that he wasn't in control anymore. Humanity was. Terran ships hovered lower, closer to the atmosphere, not firing, not bombing, not invading, just pressing their presence into the world like a blade against a throat. Entire planetary defense networks shut down one after another without a single battle. Human code flooded their systems like a tide, erasing their control, replacing their symbols with the glowing wolf, and in seconds, the entire planet belonged to Earth again. The voice returned, calm as before, "We warned you once." It echoed through their veins like a cold wind, a reminder of the moment the Council thought itself untouchable. The admirals and senators collapsed into arguments, begging for deals, for mercy, but the old generals who had survived the war against Earth a century ago just stared at the ground. They knew there would be no deals. Earth didn't need them alive. The humans had waited too long, bled too much, lost too many to offer mercy to those who had thrown them away. "Open a channel," one senator screamed. "We can surrender, we can," but the power grid cut off before he could finish. The Terrans had already silenced the entire planet. On the flagship, the human commander stood in a darkened command room, the faces of their officers calm, their voices steady. No one cheered, no one gloated, because for them, this wasn't about triumph, it was about balance, about making the galaxy remember the weight of their choices. "All systems secured," an officer reported, their voice like cold steel. The commander nodded once and gave a single order. "Hold position. No invasion. No fire. No mercy." Outside, the entire planet knelt beneath the silent weight of the fleet. The people didn't resist. They didn't fight. They simply broke. In the council chamber, the High Speaker dropped to his knees, his voice barely a whisper as he stared at the dark sky. "We should have feared the silence." Above him, the Terran dreadnoughts hovered, watching, waiting, their silence louder than any victory cry. This was the moment the galaxy's rulers finally realized they were not rulers at all. They were prey. And the wolves had come home. The galaxy surrendered not with fire but with silence. The same silence it had once forced upon humanity, now returned like a blade pressed against its throat. Fleets that once stretched across the stars were nothing but scattered metal drifting in the dark. Empires that once spoke with pride now whispered through trembling lips. The mighty council world that had ruled for centuries knelt beneath a sky blackened by Terran dreadnoughts, their wolf emblems burning. White and merciless, this was not the roar of victory. This was the sound of judgment. Across the galaxy, one world after another transmitted surrender codes without being asked. Planetary leaders bowing their heads before fleets they could not fight. Soldiers dropping their weapons in silence. Civilians staring up at black ships that didn't even need to fire to bring them to their knees. Everyone had seen what happened to those who tried to resist. Entire fleets erased in minutes. Colonies falling without a single Terran soldier setting foot on their soil. The galaxy had feared many things before, but now they feared silence itself. In the council chamber, the High Speaker stood hunched over the cold star map, once filled with bright blue lights marking their control. Now nothing but empty blackness. All that remained was a single world under siege by a fleet that didn't speak, didn't demand, didn't bargain. The same wolves they had thrown into the void a century ago now stood over them like executioners waiting for the prey to stop shaking. Senators whispered useless words. Some begged for mercy, others argued, but no one could find the courage to raise their voice because they all knew mercy was not part of this night. The High Speaker walked to the edge of the chamber and looked up at the massive viewing window, seeing nothing but the giant silhouette of the Terran flagship above the world. Its engines barely glowing, its presence heavier than any storm, and in that moment, he realized this was not conquest. This was justice, quiet and unstoppable. Across the streets of the capital world, millions knelt under the weight of the Terran fleet. Not because they were forced to, but because there was nothing left to stand for, no army, no hope, no future that didn't belong to the humans now. Screens that once projected council propaganda now showed only one symbol: the wolf, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat, a reminder of everything the galaxy had tried to erase. On one broadcast, a governor from a distant colony whispered, "We thought we buried them," before static swallowed his voice. No one answered. No one had the power to. In orbit, the Terran fleet didn't move. It didn't need to. They had already taken everything without raising their voice. No surrender treaties, no conditions, no speeches. Just silence. And the silence was enough. On the Terran flagship, the commander stood alone in the observation deck, looking down at the capital world, their expression calm, their breathing steady. Around them officers monitored a galaxy that now lay broken. Their reports came in like soft echoes, system after system confirming surrender, enemy after enemy bending without a fight, and with each word spoken, humanity's empire grew without a single roar. "The council is finished," one officer said. The commander gave no answer. They simply looked at the world below, the same world that had once laughed as they cast Earth into the void, and now it knelt beneath them. Inside the council chamber, the high speaker finally sank to his knees, his eyes hollow, his voice breaking like glass. "What have we done?" he whispered, but there was no one left to answer him. The old admirals, the last of the generation that had fought the humans, lowered their heads in silence, because they had always known this day might come. They just never believed it would come so quietly. In a final act of defiance, a few planetary defense cannons tried to fire into the sky, their beams glowing for a brief moment. But before the bolts even left the atmosphere, they were intercepted and shut down by Terran hunter ships. No explosions, no counterattack, just clean, absolute control. The last flickers of resistance died like candles in the wind. The galaxy that had once laughed at humanity now understood what their silence had meant all along. It was not surrender. It was preparation. Across every empire, every world, every station, the wolf emblem appeared on screens, on ship systems, on city towers, a silent mark carved into their minds, a reminder that the galaxy had crossed a line it should never have crossed. This wasn't humanity asking for their place back. This was humanity taking back what was stolen. Above the capital, the Terran flagship turned slowly, its engines lighting up like a storm waking from sleep, and the fleet followed, leaving the council world behind not in ruin but in shame, their silence echoing long after their shadows had passed. Humanity didn't stay to rule. They didn't build flags on conquered worlds. They didn't need to. Their message was carved into the bones of the galaxy. The wolves from the void had returned, and everyone had bowed before them without a single word. From this night forward, every star, every empire, every child would grow up hearing the same lesson. The void does not forget. Humanity was not dead. Humanity was waiting. And when they came back as the greatest fear the galaxy had ever known.